Almost overnight, she went from a possible witness to a person of interest in the case of a missing mom of 5 from New Canaan. The girlfriend in the middle of a bitter and brutal divorce battle.
The stuff you were throwing out, we have. And it's all Jennifer. It belongs to Jennifer. Do you understand?
Turned high-profile murder investigation.
Guys, what happened to Jennifer Michelle?
We're taking you inside the trial of Michelle Troconis.
And thanks for joining us once again for Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. I'm Shannon Miller. We're getting ready for what's expected to be the final day of the defense's case. It comes after testimony from a well-known expert witness on memory. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus saying there is science that explains inconsistencies in how someone remembers events, and it could account for those discrepancies in Troconis's police interviews.
The prosecution wants the jury to believe that she's a big fat liar, and there's an alternative explanation here.
Now, the jury also heard from Fotis Doulos' divorce attorney. He told them his client was, quote, very happy about a sealed custody report that came out about a month before Jennifer disappeared. We'll hear some of his testimony coming up. The defendant emotional at the end of Thursday's testimony, wiping her nose and wiping her face. It's unclear what prompted her reaction, but her friend Petu was about to take the stand when a judge said testimony would be done for the day. This also came after testimony from one of Connecticut State Police investigators. Our colleague Kevin Geisey is live outside Stamford Superior Court once again. And Kevin, most of the testimony that jurors heard involved memory yesterday, right?
Right, Shannon, good morning. Day 2 of testimony for the defense was mostly centered around an expert regarding memory and memory loss and how it pertains to this case. Specifically, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus from the University of California, Irvine, testified memory is impacted by circumstances leading up to the creation of the memory and factors related to recalling that memory, such as additional information gathered after you make a memory. She called that post-event suggestion. The defense brought her in to indicate there's an alternate reason why Michelle Troconis may have had inconsistencies in her interviews besides the prosecution's theory that she lied to investigators.
After some event occurs, sometimes people are exposed to new information. They have conversations with other people. They are interrogated. They are exposed to media coverage. They get new information. And one of the things that we and other scientists have discovered is that that post-event information, particularly if it's misleading, can contaminate or distort or transform somebody's memory.
Dr. Loftus says as part of her work for the defense, she reviewed the transcripts of the 3 interviews Michelle Troconis gave to police and most of the videos. Now, on cross-examination, attorney Sean McGinnis asked if any of the detectives suggested to Troconis that she'd been seen Fotis Doulos in the house the morning of May 24th before she said it herself in her June 2nd interview.
Prior to her explaining her whereabouts, did you see any detective on the video suggest to her that she had been with Mr. Doulos in the house?
No.
Prior to her explaining her whereabouts, did you see any detective on the video suggest to her that she had taken a shower with Mr. Doulos?
No.
Prior to her explaining her whereabouts, did you see any detective suggest that she had seen Mr. Doulos in the 4-group office with Kent Lewinnie?
No.
So prosecutors were pushing back, saying that any information Michelle Troconis was giving in later interviews were not planted there by police investigators. Shannon.
All right, so Kevin, there was another person the defense seemed to be suggesting could have implanted false memories. Who exactly was that?
Right. So at one point they brought up that loved ones or other people involved in their lives could also, as they recall some of their memory, could implant some of those sort of like planted memories inside some of the stories. The defense was sort of leaning toward Fotis Doulos. We know that the two obviously interacted commonly. The two were living with one another around the time of that first arrest. So they were sort of getting at the idea of Fotis Doulos adding in some of those memories for Michelle Troconis, especially as they were recalling some of the events of May 24th.
And especially we hear that testimony, Kevin, about writing those timelines as well. Fotis making some suggestions to Michelle, Michelle making some suggestions to Fotis. Loftus also testified about the impact certain police interrogation tactics may have on a subject's memory.
In fact, sometimes the police introduce information into those interviews that is new information, is misinformation. And so it's a kind of a setting that is ripe for potentially contaminating somebody's memory. And they may not do it deliberately to contaminate memory. They may have some other goals in mind, but when they introduce misinformation, they can affect what the person they're interviewing says.
Now, one of the topics Loftus testified about was the use of alleged deception by police. It's legal here in Connecticut, and it was used during Michelle Troconis' interviews in 2019, admittedly by the investigators. In the first interrogation, Detective John Kimball showed Troconis a screen grab from the video taken on Albany Avenue with a man pulling what looks like a bloody pillow out of the garbage can and then putting it back. Now, Kimball told her they found evidence on it, but in fact, that pillow had never been found.
This gentleman comes up to the garbage can and pulls that out. What does that look like to you? What's the red stuff?
Blood.
It's blood. And that's Jennifer's blood.
Now, Kimball testified that this was a technique called a ruse. It's a strategically planned deception by law enforcement. He said the aim was to get to the truth. It was also used in Michelle Troconis' third interview when detectives told Michelle Jennifer's blood was found inside the Toyota Tacoma.
So that's where your boyfriend wanted to have sex with you on the side of the door of the car. And where do you think that belongs to? Who do you think that belongs to? And and he wants to do what with you? With the door open. Okay. So apparently Jennifer's blood makes him horny. So if you know stuff that you're not telling us, that's the man you're protecting, because that's sick.
I'm not protecting him.
Now, that is Detective Clabby there in that line of questioning. Detective Kimball said that comment was also a tactic designed to get a strong emotional reaction from Troconis. Loftus testified that police can be seen as authority figures and that people may be more likely to believe misinformation if it comes from a source they trust.
In many jurisdictions, the police are permitted to lie to people. They're permitted to tell people that they flunked the polygraph when they didn't, or their fingerprints were found at the scene when they weren't. They can lie to them, and they're permitted to do that. And I personally think that that is not a very good practice.
Now, the prosecution hit hard on Dr. Loftus's past work with some very high-profile defendants. She testified more than 300 times. Half of those cases were criminal, and Dr. Loftus says she's only testified for the prosecution once before. Here are some of the cases she either consulted on or testified for the defense on, which Attorney McGinnis asked her about. Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, O.J. Simpson, Michael Jackson, the Menendez brothers, Ted Bundy, Phil Spector, Harvey Weinstein, and Robert Durst. Attorney John Schoenhorn showed the jury the signed agreement with his office that it has with Dr. Loftus, including the $600 an hour fee. It's dated on August 12th of 2020. The state asked her about how she bills hours as an expert witness.
So that's 14 hours is $600 an hour, is that right?
14 hours before I left California.
Understood. So you're also charging for right now, correct?
I'm charging as you question me, yes?
So the longer I question you, the more money you make?
Yes, but I hope you'll keep it short.
Okay. So we'll see about that.
Now, McGinnis asked about her fee, which recently went up to $700, but she is billing the defense and Michelle Troconis at the fee that they initially agreed upon, which is $600.
Doctor, is it fair to say that you have built a lucrative career coming into court and testifying in criminal cases?
It's fair to say that I'm compensated for my time, just as you are.
How much do you think I make $700 an hour?
We're going to take a recess because things are becoming unhinged. Recess.
Judge Randolph Stern in that call for a recess after that line of questioning. Dr. Loftus spoke with reporters outside of Stamford Superior Court yesterday. She said Attorney McGinnis did what most prosecutors do, which is bring up, in her words, unpopular people she has been brought in to testify for in the past.
I think it is kind of an unfair thing to try to link the current accused, Michelle, with these people who are unpopular.
So, Kevin, it wasn't just about linking the accused to these other people. It's also about attacking her credibility, right?
Absolutely. Prosecutors were demonstrating to the jury that she has sort of a sympathy for defendants, or allegedly has sort of a sympathy for defendants, attempting to sort of get the jurors to believe that she's not necessarily the most credible witness to bring in to talk about this. But of course, the defense comes back and says she was strictly there to talk about science. She was strictly there to talk about her research that she's been doing over decades. So she is the best person to testify about memory and memory loss. But of course, the state taking that as an opportunity to push on her credibility so the jurors might not take her science at face value.
All right, and to push on her own memory, Kevin, the defense also called on one of the investigators who interviewed Pavel Gumieni. State Police Sergeant Christopher Allegro testified that the 8-hour interview happened in July of 2019 with Gumieni's attorney, Liddy Urso, present. The former Ford Group employee was granted immunity by the state for his testimony. Sergeant Allegro says he wasn't aware of any agreement when the interview happened. Attorney Audrey Felsen read from a transcript of the interview in which Allegro asked Gumieni if there were any conversations with Fotis that stuck out in his mind.
It was one of those specific questions. If there's something else that you're holding on to, I mean, now is the time. Like, if he even said outright, like, that bitch, I'm going to kill her. But anything like that man, do you remember saying that to him?
I do.
Did he ever say that Michelle Troconis said anything of that nature?
Judge, we're just going to object at this point.
I do not recall asking him myself a specific question related to Michelle Troconis.
Do you recall, though, the question is...
So that hearsay objection you heard was overruled. It appears Felsen may be trying to address this comment Gumieni testified that Michelle Troconis made while the two were carrying wood at Jefferson Crossing.
She said, I'm going to kill that bitch when she's going to turn up.
So, Kevin, the jury heard that expert testimony about implanted memories. Does it seem like the defense is implying that Gumieni's memory of that inflammatory comment he said Michelle made had been implanted by this investigator?
It's possible. That testimony was definitely separated by a little bit of testimony in between. It was separated by a lunch break. So those jurors are going to have to make that leap for themselves. But we've sort of continued to hear from the judge that those jurors can make reasonable inferences. So having sort of that testimony on the same day as the memory expert could certainly be pointing to that memory from Pavel Gumieni was implanted. But of course, Detective Allegro couldn't determine whether or not he actually said that in that interview. And without watching that roughly 8-hour interview, we'll probably never know exactly when he made that comment and sort of the context around that comment.
And we should note there were multiple interviews with Pavel Gumieni as well. And again, you're right, Kevin, it really does come down to the jury stringing all of this evidence into their interpretation. So the defense, Kevin, also called Michael Rose, who was Fotis Dulos' divorce attorney at the time Jennifer disappeared. He represented Dulos from January to June of 2019 in the custody and divorce proceedings. We have heard plenty so far in this trial about a sealed custody report, the contents of which are not allowed to come into court. Attorney Rose testified about Fotis Dulos' reaction once he read the contents of that report.
He was very happy with what was there. Pleased. You could tell that he just seemed relieved and more optimistic than I'd seen him in a while.
Well, it took about an hour and a half for Attorney Rose and his client to review the document. That happened at the Dulos Children's Guardian Ad Litem attorney's office, Michael Meehan's office, back in April of 2019. And since this was a sealed report, the rules were very strict.
We were given copies, and we're not allowed to bring in, to the best of my recollection, not allowed to bring in iPhones. We're not allowed to make any photostatic copies of the document. We were allowed to review it and take notes of key salient points.
Now, after reviewing the document, Rose filed a motion which he was not allowed to testify about. So, Kevin, this is all part of that strategy from the defense that Fotis didn't have a motive to kill Jennifer because things seem to be going his way in that custody dispute, right?
Right. This custody report continues to come up over and over again without actually getting into the contents of that report specifically, something that we'll never actually be able to see. So the defense continues to push this as sort of a motive killer for Fotis Dulos. He did not want to hurt Jennifer. He wouldn't have wanted to hurt Jennifer because it would have set him back in that custody battle that he was going through. So this is something that the defense continues to bring up over and over. But of course, every time this custody report comes into the courtroom, the judge sort of has to set up very strict parameters, and both attorneys are sort of constantly on alert, making sure that nothing that isn't supposed to come into court or isn't supposed to be sort of broadcast makes it anywhere inside that courtroom.
And Kevin, they talked about all the restrictions they had to go through on reading that report. It's the same sealed document Michelle Troconis is accused by state prosecutors of having on her laptop in court, at least one page of that. That contempt hearing is set to happen after the defense arrest. So, Kevin, how soon could the jury get the case in their hands?
All right, so it's anticipated the defense will rest today. We do have that contempt hearing likely early next week, so we could have jury deliberations as early as mid next week.
Right. What a ride it has been. Kevin Geis live for us once again outside Stamford Superior Court. We will let you get inside the courtroom for what's expected to be the last day of the defense's case. Much more ahead on Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We will talk about the defense attacking the tactics used in those police interrogations. Analysis with former state police spokesperson Brian Foley. Up next. And welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We are joined once again by Brian Foley, the former spokesperson for the Connecticut State Police at the time of Jennifer's disappearance and in the investigation. Thank you for being with us once again. Brian, you heard that expert witness, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, criticize the use of what she called deceptive tactics in police interviews, of saying that it's not a very good practice in her opinion. So what's your reaction to that, and why exactly, again, do detectives use deception? And does it help or hurt that search for the truth, which is what you're really after?
Yeah, so typically it's not the first thing that you're going to jump to is coming out with some sort of deception or lie. You know, the classic case in the old days was you drop the videotape in an evidence bag on the desk and you say, hey, we got you on video doing X, Y, and Z. It's usually only used to elicit a truthful response, but the most important part is that's usually not the smoking gun, what you get from the using deception. Usually the response should give you more evidence that you can rely on, that you other areas to go and investigate and provide more evidence. So it's used to get a truthful response, but you know you want to get more information so that you can go get more evidence, and typically a last resort type of a part of the investigation.
And we should also note the investigators admitted throughout their testimony certain points of that they used what they called a ruse or a deceptive tactic. Let's talk about policing in 2019 versus today. After George Floyd, we're talking after Connecticut's accountability law, of course, Jennifer's investigation happening before all of this. There is such a critical spotlight, of course, on how investigations are conducted, police conduct in general. How has this changed as far as interrogations go now in a high-profile case like this? Has that accountability law changed the way that investigators approach these interviews?
Well, I would say yes. You're always thinking about how a jury is going to react, 2 or 3 years down the road, and a lot of that plays into what's going on. But about 10 years ago, the state of Connecticut made a law that you had to record all felony, basically, confessions or witness statements that come in a very basic sense. But, at this point, if you look at some of the interviews there, this is the third interview as we're starting to look now. The detectives are frustrated. They know there's deception going on. The interview, the answers have changed so many times now. They believe deception is going on, and now they're trying other angles. They've tried the nice stuff, and they've done good cop, bad cop, and now they're, you know, you see this interview start to get pretty emotional, and they're putting on her pretty heavy. But listen, a woman's dead, and she has a family, and these cops have to do everything they can to try to get these answers, the truthful answers, to find the victim. So you can understand that they're trying everything at this point in those interviews, and those are one of the tactics, is to really come on strong.
Michelle Troconis maintains her innocence, that
Yep.
she says she was truthful with them, that
Yep.
she would help them with whatever she could. I want to get now to that expert that was brought in yesterday, this memory expert who was asked questions about implanting memories potentially, which she admits and testifies to that in those interviews, that did not happen. Do investigators expect their interrogations to kind of be picked apart by experts that might be brought in on the back end of this?
Yeah, look, this isn't like stealing shrimp at Target here. The cops know this is going to a jury. They know that they're going to retain experts, and that's what's done here. And look, you can retain an expert to come in and almost say anything. And if you look at some of the trials that this expert was tied to, that's going to play a role in the jury. When she first gets put on the stand, the defense attorney will build her credibility, talk about all her training, all her experience, all her education. But on the other side, now the prosecution is going to attack it from the other angle. Certainly, all these cases, that this is her career, I believe to a jury that would affect the veracity of it all.
And switching gears now, there was a piece of evidence that had not been reported until this trial, not in an arrest warrant, not in any of Michelle's 3 arrest warrants, any of Kent Mawhinney's warrant, Fotis Doulos' warrants. Smoke seen on surveillance video from across the Jefferson Crossing property, rising from the chimney there on May 24th that afternoon. Can you talk more about this piece of evidence and how it plays into the puzzle? I had some questions for you on this, but let's just talk about that fireplace.
Yep. So look, they got that from neighbors' videos, and typically you're going to get 30 days or more of video evidence. And what the cops are really going to do with that is go look at that it was smoke. The smoke was that day. Look at the weather. Go back 5 days. Go back 10 days. Go back 30 days. They never used the chimney, and now all of a sudden on that day they did. That's what's really going to jump into the jury. When the crime scene cops go in the house, yes, they're going to look in the fireplace. My suspicion is the fireplace was cleaned out because you're not seeing any evidence of there. All the major crimes detectives at the Connecticut State Police have some level of arson training and seizing that sort of evidence. So if there were evidence there, they would know how to retain it. Look at that type of fire, that much smoke, the evidence that's going to be able to be obtained from any type of ashes there is extremely limited. But the State Police would have had that training. My suspicion, that fireplace was cleaned out prior to them getting there.
To your knowledge, there was nothing of evidentiary value that was found in that fireplace.
No, and they would have looked. You know, look at the crime scene pictures would have everything in there that they went and took pictures of. So that would be there, and the cops, those detectives, wouldn't miss a fireplace or evidence in there. So again, I have to believe that was thoroughly cleaned out and the evidence gone elsewhere.
Michelle Troconis telling that was a normal routine for her to burn the fireplace. Again, investigators probably wanted to look on all that video days leading up to that to see again if that matched her story, what she was telling investigators. Much more analysis coming up with Brian Foley. We'll talk about the emotional impact of Gloria Farber's testimony and the toll trials like this have on victims' families. Stay with us. We are back now with Brian Foley, former spokesperson for the Connecticut State Police Commissioner at the time that Jennifer disappeared. Gloria Farber took the stand this week, Jennifer's mother. We have never publicly heard from her in all of this. Investigators have spoken with Gloria Farber throughout this whole process. You had talked at the start of this on day one, Brian, just about, the length of time it takes sometimes for these cases to go to trial and the impact on the family. What was your takeaway from this moment? It was brief, but what do you think about having her on the stand?
There's a lot that goes into this, and it really comes down to what we call detective maintenance of the victim and detectives maintaining a good rapport with the family. Prior to this going to trial, throughout the whole thing, the detectives stay in contact with the family. You begin to have to, warn them that, hey, a trial's coming. We may need you to testify, but only if you can. But you understand that to have the loss of a child, you can imagine on the jury how heavy to see someone there, and the weight of her testimony coming in there. Nothing that's going to be a smoking gun type of direct evidence, but to have that weight come in and be in front of them, yes. But the police have to, and the prosecutor have to prepare that victim of what's going to happen when she takes the stand, and the memories and the things that are going to go through there. Typically, you pick one person from the family to come in that's going to give you the best statement. So very difficult for the family. I feel so bad for them to have to go through this, but I'm sure the detectives did a lot of prep work.
And yet she did it with grace and a smile on her face, and really seemed to kind of have a moment there where she looked at the jury to kind of familiarize them with herself. Brian, thank you as always. That wraps up our exclusive Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis streaming special. You can watch the trial live when court starts around 10.